Good evening, everyone. In continuation with the chapter we studied last time, that is ecosystem, we will continue further. We already studied about definition of ecosystem, what are different ways to classify ecosystem, and what are the components of ecosystem. In that, we learned about biotic and abiotic components. And when we talked about biotic and abiotic components, we understood that biotic components can be further subdivided into producer, consumer, and decomposer. We know that uh, these producers and consumers of ecosystem can be helpful in categorizing ecosystem or judging the efficiency of ecosystem in terms of productivity. So a few types of productivity is learned by us and the relationship between them is also discussed in previous lectures. So with this, we are going to start the next part, that is decomposition. Although these decomposers are never ever mentioned in any kind of food chain, food web or anything like that, they are equally important for ecosystem. Decomposers are the key role player in converting the substance into reusable form. Imagine when first time the life was created on earth, if all organisms remain like that only after their death, so world will be piled up with so many dead bodies which are not having any future, and slowly and steadily all necessary ingredient required for life will be used up and no new life form was able to be created. But this doesn't occur. If I keep a piece of apple somewhere in the ground, after some time, or I see there is a change started in that apple, the apple will rot, and then after some time, if I keep it in ground, you can see some of the smaller animals are taking food from it, like insects and others, and the rest of the part is diminished in the soil itself. This is the magic of decomposers. So they break down organic matter and convert them finally into inorganic substances like CO2, water, and other nutrients. So decomposition is generally a water oxygen requiring process, and the raw material for decomposition is known as detritus. So what are detritus? The dead remains of the plants like leaf, bark, flowers, fruits, anything which is not living is called detritus, and dead remains of animals and their fecal matter. That means the stool passed by them and their dead bodies. All of these can be considered into detritus. Okay. Now, what are the steps in decomposition? See, whenever here a very nice and beautiful picture you can see, it's the carcass of an animal. After some time, you can see this is the way animal is getting decomposed step by step, and a new life form, that is mushroom, is produced from that area. So it doesn't occur in one day, in a few seconds or hour. It's a very long process. So these are the basic steps of decomposition, that is fragmentation, leaching, catabolism, humification, and mineralization. So first step is uh, fragmentation. It's a physical come chemical process. There are some organisms called detrivores, for example, earthworm. You must have heard about this word, that earthworm is the best friend of us. So, if we call that earthworm is the best friend, is our best friend, we must be knowing that how it is a best friend. It actually eat up all these things, and the stool passed by it is very good for it. It is increasing fertility of the soil. So that's why these detrivores, earthworms are there, there are insects, they eat those dead part and break them into smaller particles. So here pay attention, break them into smaller particles, not smaller biomolecules. So it is more of a physical process than a chemical process, and that's why termed as fragmentation. Next step is leaching. So now the part is broken down into smaller fragments. It need to reach to the organisms present in the soil. So how it will reach? The inorganic nutrients, they will go to the inner part of soil, and they are generally precipitated as unavailable salt. Now what is this unavailable salt? In grade 11, there was a chapter of mineral nutrition. There you must have studied about nitrogen cycle. You know that nitrogen, if it is present in soil in the form of nitrate, plants cannot use it. Plants will be requiring further breakdown for absorption. So this leaching will ensure their precipitation in unavailable form. The form is there, but it is in the form which cannot be availed by organism. So leaching word describes the seeping of these inorganic nutrients into the soil. Now comes the chemical process, catabolism. Here the detritus will be broken down, that means the chemical reaction will take place, and the organic substances will be actually broken down into smaller inorganic form. Okay, so it is done by whom? By different bacteria and fungi. So you may have a question कि मैम ऐसा होता है, पहले सारा fragmentation हो जाता है, फिर सारी leaching होती है, then catabolism occur, nothing. See beta, bacteria can present even at the surface. You must have seen that if we keep a piece of bread somewhere, the mucor or the slime mold, they have tendency to attack those food particles. They are not waiting for any detritus to make its fragment. So these three process will always go hands in hands, and it will go simultaneously. It's not necessary that one is done then. It may go simultaneously too. So what is the next step? Next step is humification. See, humus is a very, very dark colored substance, and it is highly acidic due to presence of humic acid. So basically the organic substance present in any detritus is converted into humus. It is actually resistant to microbial action, so its decomposition is comparatively very slow. Now you may ask me why it is resistant, because of presence of humic acid and its low pH. It's colloidal in nature, and that's why it is a very good reservoir of nutrients. So do you think it's being resistant to microbial action is good or bad? What do you think, class? As humus is resistant to microbial action, is it good or bad?
Bad.
Actually, it is good. It gives plants that time to take up some of the nutrients and utilize them. Okay, so that is actually good. Okay, let's go to the last stage of this decomposition process, that is called mineralization. Now at this stage, the humus is completely degraded, and inorganic nutrients present in the humus is released by the microorganisms decomposition. So these are the stages of decomposition. So what are the nutrients released by decomposition? Inorganic substances like carbon dioxide, water, and there are nutrients like ammonium, iron, then calcium, magnesium, potassium. All these ions are finally released by the mineralization process. So we will take a pause and look into a video for decomposition, and then we will move ahead. So I request all of you to wait for a moment till I share my screen.
Did you know that if decomposers did not exist, the earth would be covered by a layer of dead flies about 20 feet deep within a month? Decomposers play a very important role in keeping our environment clean. They break down complex organic matter and convert it into simple inorganic substances like water, carbon dioxide, and nutrients. This natural process is known as decomposition. The raw material for decomposition is the detritus, which comprises dead and decaying plant remains such as leaves, branches, flowers, roots, and dead animal remains, including fecal matter. Decomposition involves a series of important steps, namely fragmentation, leaching, catabolism, humification, and mineralization. Of these steps, fragmentation, leaching, and catabolism occur simultaneously on the detritus. During fragmentation, the detritus is broken down into smaller particles by detritivores, which are organisms that feed on and break down dead plant or animal matter while returning essential nutrients to the environment. Some examples of detritivores include fungi, insects like dung flies, and terrestrial worms such as earthworms and millipedes. During leaching, inorganic nutrients that are soluble in water drain into the soil and get precipitated as unavailable salts. While during catabolism, the detritus is further acted upon by bacteria and fungi and is degraded into simpler inorganic substances by the action of their enzymes. The next step of decomposition is humification, where the detritus gets converted into a dark amorphous substance called humus. Humus is extremely resistant to microbial action and thus has a very slow rate of decomposition. Moreover, it is also very colloidal in nature and therefore serves as a source of nutrients. Finally, during mineralization, the last step of decomposition, certain microbes act on the humus, degrade it, and release inorganic nutrients into the soil. Both humification and mineralization occur inside the soil. However, the process of decomposition is affected by several factors. It is primarily an oxygen-requiring process, and the chemical composition of the detritus, along with climatic factors such as temperature and soil moisture, affect the rate of decomposition. For a particular temperature, the rate of decomposition is slower if the detritus is rich in substances like lignin and chitin, and is faster if the detritus is rich in nitrogen and water-soluble substances like sugars. Climatic conditions such as temperature and soil moisture affect the activity of microbes, thus affecting the rate of decomposition. That is, the rate of decomposition is faster when the temperature is warm and the environment is moist. Whereas low temperature and lack of oxygen favors anaerobiosis, which slows the process of decomposition and leads to a build-up of organic materials. Therefore, the process of decomposition helps to recycle the nutrients required for the very existence of life. The amount of biomass varies from one.
So I just wanted to show this video. I found it is a very descriptive one. Definitely I'm going to share the link with all of you so that while revising you can definitely have a look. It's all about decomposition. Any doubts, anyone? Class?
No, ma'am.
So I guess we can move ahead. This is the diagrammatic representation of decomposition cycle in a terrestrial ecosystem. You can see that the leaf of plant, we know that plants shed their leaf. Okay, so they are eaten up by this millipede and also partially composed by decomposers such as fungi. It can be further decomposed by earthworm, bacteria, whatever it is. And whatever organic rich soil is there, from that the nutrient is obtained by plant and new leaves are formed by that. So this kind of recycling is the function of detritus. So these are the functions influencing decomposition. It is always already discussed in the video, so I am quickly running over through this. So now we will talk about a very, very important part of discussion, that is the energy flow part. And this energy flow is very important because you know that whenever we are talking about efficiency of a ecosystem, we are talking about productivity. And productivity is always measured in terms that what biomass is produced, and biomass is related with the energy, because the conversion on production of C6H12O6 will depend on availability of sunlight, because it is the key role player in converting inorganic substance, that is CO2 and H2O, into C6H12O6, which is a complex organic substance. So what is this energy flow? It's very important and astonishing thing that sun is the ultimate source of all energy. In earth, you tell me any kind of energy, its main source is sun. Can you give me example of any energy which source of which is not sun? Class?
There is no example.
Yes. You talk about wind energy, wind is created due to sun. Okay. You talk about fossil fuel, they are produced by direct input of direct or indirect input of sun's energy. So it is the ultimate source of energy. Now, is there any ecosystem exist on earth which doesn't depend on sun? Can you tell me? Organisms doesn't require sun, they can live by their own. And how, what is then the source of energy for them? How they produce the energy? Yes, life exists in a earth in place where sun is not there, and still they live happily ever after. That is the area where sunlight cannot reach. You know, on earth there are discontinuities like morbid discontinuity. There are deep oceanic trenches. So what are these trenches? They are the gaps of Earth's crust through which many a times hot lava is coming out. And they are unnoticed because they are under the sea. So these are known as hydrothermal vents, and they are generally located under the sea. So these are such deep area where sunlight cannot penetrate. So how organisms live there? The main source of energy they use for production of food is chemical energy. Sulfur bacteria, purple sulfur bacteria, and other organisms, they like thiobacillus, they use the chemical energy to convert the simple form of food into complex form. Okay, and for them we cannot say that the sun is the ultimate source of energy. Okay, now do you know that sun is radiating so many types of radiation? What are the radiations that we can see? What we call them? Can we see every types of light emitted by sun? Class,
UV rays?
can we see UV rays?
No.
So then what are the types of rays we can see? The visible ray.
Radio waves, microwaves.
रेडियो माइक्रोवेव तुम देख पाते हो?
X rays, gamma rays.
ना बेटा, विजिबल रे, विपजी और I don't have words, speechless I am. बेटा रेडियो वेव्स तुम देख पाते हो? 92.7 FM जब चलता है, can you see the radio wave coming towards the radio of yours? Can you see X-ray? Rays, sun rays that we can see are visible rays, beta. Vibgyor. What are Vibgyor?
Violet, indigo, blue, green, orange, yellow.
So that's why out of the solar radiation that is reaching to Earth, only a very minute part of it is visible by us, that is visible region lights, Vibgyor. Out of that, a few light is known as photosynthetically active radiation. Can you tell me in which light photosynthesis doesn't occur?
Green?
Yes, because it reflects green. Okay. So photosynthetically active radiation is less than 50% of the light that is coming into on the surface of Earth from sun. Okay, so 50% efficiency is already gone. And that 50% is really less because from sun when light is coming to Earth, amount of energy is absorbed by the atmosphere and all. So already the one which is reaching to Earth is a bit less. From that, less than 50% is known as photosynthetically active radiation. That means the radiation in which photosynthesis can be functional. Okay. Now, if I am talking about the amount of energy reaching to plants and chemosynthetic bacteria or other photosynthetic organism, they can capture only 2 to 10% of these photosynthetically active radiation. And the strange part is out of this 2 to 10% only, the whole world sustains. So now can you understand the importance of plant, beta? You can understand that if we are decreasing number of plants around us every day, so what will happen, beta? People who can, like organisms which can capture sunlight of 2 to 10% is reducing. So in turn, we are putting ourselves in danger. So ecosystems obey the second law of thermodynamics. So they require to constant supply of energy to synthesize the molecules. If supply of energy is broken, the synthesis of molecule will be stopped. So I hope both of you know what entropy is. Can you tell me the second law of thermodynamics? Or I'm expecting too much?
Yes, ma'am. Second law of thermodynamics states that when the energy is transferred, there will be less energy available in the ecosystem.
System. So as you can see from the transferred energy, only 2 to 10% is utilized by plant. And imagine when plant is passing that energy to next trophic level, that is next consider primary consumer. Obviously, some amount of it will be utilized by plant itself. No, plant is not very altruistic organism. It is doing all this not for with a great heart कि चलो मुझे animals को help करना है. It's a process and we are taking benefit of it. Okay, so it is very much important to counteract entropy. Entropy means disorder in a system. So if their energy supply is too much, the disorder of the system will increase. If it is too less, then also the disorder in system will increase. So there are producers or autotroph. They are mainly synthesizing food, and they can be terrestrial ecosystem, they can be herbaceous or woody plant. And in aquatic ecosystem, they can be phytoplankton, algae, and higher plants which float on surface of water or present at the part of other part of water. Some plants may have their roots uprooted deep rooted in the bottom of the pond, and their flowers and other parts are floating on the surface of water. So now the amount of energy trapped by the producer is passed to a consumer or the organism will die. So this passage of energy is very much important. Consumers, as we discussed already, can be primary, secondary, and tertiary. And energy that obtained from producer will be transformed to primary consumer, then primary consumer's energy to secondary consumer, and secondary consumer's energy to. Here a beautiful example of food chain is given. Producer, grasshopper is the primary consumer. This is the secondary consumer. This is the tertiary consumer. We can call them the final consumer. And fungi is the decomposer. Okay. So food chains can be of two types. So what is food chain? That is very important for us to know. Food chain are the chain which is describing the feeding relationship between different organisms. So generally it is always starting with a producer and ending with either consumer or decomposer. So the chain or the relationship diagram which is showing transfer of energy from one organism to another is known as food chain. Now, how it is of two types, one is grazing food chain and detritus food chain. In case of grazing food chain, it will always start by a producer. Okay. And from producer, there will be primary consumer and secondary consumer and so on. Generally, in grazing food chain, it is the decomposers are never mentioned, because it is to be understood that decomposers will decompose. Now in detritus food chain, here the primary consumer will not depend on plant, it is dependent on dead organic substances, that is detritus. So in detritus food chain is not starting with a producer, it is starting with the detritus. So when any organism die, the ecosystem of that is known as detritus food chain. So each ecosystem can have many food chains. If they are independent, we call them food chains. And if these food chains are having intermingled, that is intertangled kind of components, जैसे कि एक detritus food chain dead leaf से start हो रहा है. It is then taken by woodlouse. Then there is a blackbird, and this blackbird is eaten by an eagle, and that eagle is actually eating toad or frog. So if any such kind of interaction of food chain is there, we call it food wave. So detritus is made up of saprotrophs or decomposers, and they are responsible for biogeochemical cycling. So aquatic ecosystem is grazing food chain where major amount of energy is produced and flowed, and terrestrial ecosystem, it is mainly by detritus food chain than through grazing food chain. So in aquatic ecosystem, most amount of energy flow is by grazing, and in terrestrial it is by detritus. Okay, so but it's intermingled. Like, can you see this diagram? Here, can you see this frog is eating grasshopper? It can eat butterfly also. It can eat fly also. And this frog can be eaten by either eagle or by snake. So here I wish to mention, if you follow this chain, okay, and then you can find that this is the producer, this is the consumer number 1, this is the consumer number 2, this is the consumer number 3, and this is the consumer number 4. Whereas if you are thinking about another food chain, which is starting with, let me tell you, from here, then here the prime producer is same, consumer is same, but C2 is this one. The secondary consumer is changed. And it may be also possible that, for example, I will talk about this eagle. Okay, if I'm talking about this eagle as a direct relationship between, like this, it's like this. So here in this case, producer, consumer number 1, consumer number 2, this will be consumer number 3. But when I am taking this red line, eagle itself is transformed into consumer number 4. So depending on what food eagle is eating, the role of an organism in ecosystem changes. ईगल ने जिस दिन डायरेक्टली फ्रॉग को खा लिया, उस दिन वो टर्शियरी कंज्यूमर, और अगर उसने स्नेक को खाया, जिसने फ्रॉग को खाया, इट इज क्वाटरनरी कंज्यूमर. अंडरस्टूड दीश अभी?
Yes, ma'am.
So this is the way food chains are often intermingled, and they are then interconnected. Such interconnected food chains are known as food webs. Okay. So here you can see 4 trophic level. So what is a trophic level? A specific space of organism in the food chain. So this space is not talking about physical space. It's talking about position. मैंने पहले भी आपको बोला है कि many a times people have such misconception कि ecosystem is a place. It's not a place. It's depicting about the interrelationship of organism. Similarly, when I'm talking about trophic level, do not think कि ये एक जगह है. It's the position of that organism in the food chain. So different trophic level are there: primary producer, primary consumer, secondary consumer, tertiary consumer. So primary producer, first trophic level, second trophic level, third trophic level and fourth trophic level. You can see this easily in this diagram that this is trophic level 1, grass, trophic level 2 is cow, trophic level 3 is this fox, and trophic level 4 is this lion. So depending on अगर ecosystem में ये fox नहीं रहा, then lion will be the third trophic level in that specific ecosystem. Okay, so we human beings, especially the non-vegetarian people, are the most confused structure for ecosystem, because many a times we are primary consumer. For example, if I am eating chana, then I am primary consumer, and if I am like eating a piece of chicken, then I am the secondary consumer. Okay, so let's look into the concept of energy flow. So you can see that sun is radiating heat. Some amount of it is absorbed by the plant. Then some amount of this heat is radiated out or utilized by the plant. And obviously, if plant is having some amount of heat, less than that is transformed into next topic. And it is applicable to all. So basically, एक goat प्लांट्स को खाके जितना एनर्जी ले रहा है, उससे कई कम एनर्जी एक लायन को गोट को खाके मिलता है. बट लायन इज बिगर. देन हाउ डू यू थिंक दे मैनेज दिस प्रॉब्लम? दीश अभी how they manage this problem? आप समझ रहे हो? The amount of energy obtained by goat is less than the amount of more than the amount of energy obtained by lion, because it is directly eating plant and lion is indirectly eating the goat. So how lion will make sure कि उसको जितनी energy चाहिए that it will obtain? दीश अभी बोलो.
The lion will eat more goats.
Very good. It's correct. Lion will eat more goats. So you can understand, as we go farther in trophic level, more far it is going, obviously it will be actually getting less. So the amount of energy will decrease in each successive trophic level, and finally when organism die, it will be detritus or dead biomass, and it can be acting as an energy source for decomposers. So the amount of living material in a trophic system is known as standing crop. जैसे प्राइमरी प्रोड्यूसर, उसमें कितना लिविंग मटेरियल अवेलेबल है, दैट इज नोन एज स्टैंडिंग क्रॉप. प्राइमरी कंज्यूमर, व्हाट इज द अमाउंट ऑफ लिविंग मटेरियल, दैट इज कॉल्ड स्टैंडिंग क्रॉप. And how it is measured? It is measured in terms of biomass, that is mass of living organism, or number of organism in a specific unit area. So 1 square kilometer area में what is the number of living organism? But biomass is always the correct method, but it is difficult to calculate. That's why people take about number. So biomass of species is measured about either in terms of fresh weight or in terms of dry weight. So dry weight is more accurate because it has exact mass of body which will remain constant. Because if you see, if you keep a piece of like what I can say, piece of any kind of plant stem or root, after some time you can see it will dry. So due to its drying, the value or the biomass, that is the fresh weight, will change, but the dry weight will remain constant, because in dry weight you are already deducting the amount of water. Okay, so there is a 10% law proposed by Lindemann, and he said that from one trophic level to another, only 10% energy is transmitted. Okay, so we will talk now very interesting thing. Although it is called pyramids, but it has no relationship with Egypt. So these are known as ecological pyramids. I wish to share with you about those parts of productivity and energy. Just give me a chance to share that video once. We will continue further.
Ecosystem to another. Biomass is the mass of living organisms or the organic matter in a unit area of an ecosystem at a given time. It is expressed in terms of mass per unit area, that is, gram per meter square. If we compare a forest, desert, or tundra ecosystem, we find that the biomass of the forest ecosystem is greater than the other two. This is due to the presence of a large number of primary producers in the forest. Primary producers are organisms that can produce biomass from inorganic substances. They typically include photosynthetically active organisms such as plants, cyanobacteria or blue-green algae, and other unicellular organisms. During photosynthesis, plants use chlorophyll to fix inorganic substances such as water and carbon dioxide into organic substances such as glucose in the presence of sunlight, which acts as the main source of energy. So the light energy of the sun is converted into chemical energy of glucose or sugars. The glucose thus produced is converted into starch for storage in plants, or may be combined with other nutrients such as nitrogen, phosphorus or sulfur to produce other complex molecules such as proteins or nucleic acids, and is stored as biomass. Therefore, the amount of biomass produced per unit area by plants through photosynthesis is called primary production. Is expressed in terms of weight per unit area. That is, gram per meter square, or energy produced per unit area. That is, kilocalorie per meter square. The rate of primary production is called primary productivity. In other words, primary productivity is the amount of biomass produced per unit area and per unit time by plants during photosynthesis. To compare the productivity of different ecosystems, it is expressed in terms of weight per unit area and time. That is, gram per meter square per year, or energy produced per unit area and time. That is, kilocalories per meter square per year. The primary productivity of an ecosystem is dependent on the plant species inhabiting the area, and several other factors such as the photosynthetic capacity of plants and availability of nutrients. As a result, it varies from one ecosystem to another. Primary productivity can be categorized as gross primary productivity or GPP and net primary productivity or NPP. GPP is the total energy fixed by primary producers as biomass through photosynthetic activity per unit area per unit time. A fraction of this GPP is used by plants during respiration to meet their energy requirements. This is known as respiration losses and is denoted as R. Now, if respiration losses are subtracted from GPP, net primary productivity is obtained, which is the net biomass available for consumption by heterotrophs. Heterotrophs such as herbivores, carnivores, omnivores, and decomposers feed on this net biomass available either directly or indirectly and convert chemical energy of their food into their own biomass. The rate of formation of biomass by consumers, or the amount of biomass formed per unit area and time by consumers, is called secondary productivity. A part of the food consumed by heterotrophs is assimilated and is used for various metabolic activities such as respiration, growth, and reproduction, and the remaining is stored as biomass. Thus, the food or energy assimilated and stored by autotrophs is passed on to the consumers. Moreover, the efficiency with which this energy transfer takes place from one trophic level to the other is called energy efficiency. Did you know that the biosphere produces about 170 billion tons of net organic matter annually? However, the ocean accounts for just 55 billion tons of organic matter, even though it occupies 70% of the Earth's surface. The low NPP of oceans can be attributed to the small number of plant species inhabiting the oceans compared to land. So, the least productive ecosystems are the ones limited by sunlight and water, while the most productive ecosystems are the ones with high temperatures, plenty of water, and nutrients. In this manner, productivity is vital for the production of biomass in any ecosystem. All of us know about the pyramids of Egypt, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. This pyramid structure is also obtained when we illustrate the number or biomass or energy of different organisms at different trophic.
So we will first look into the pyramid concept, and then we will go for discussion of video. So in ecosystem, nowhere such kind of pyramids exist, beta. They are just a diagrammatic representation of either biomass or energy or the numbers. They are diagrams, and obviously, as you know, if I am talking about biomass or number, it is always expected that the number of producers should be more than the consumers. Can you tell me why? Why in subsequent trophic level the biomass or number is expected to decrease, not increase? ऐसा क्यों होता है? जैसे कि अगर एक
मैं-
इकोसिस्टम में ले रही हूँ ग्रास, grasshopper, frog and snake. In these number of grass, grasshopper, frog and snake, which one should have more number?
Grass.
Why it should be always grass? Why not frog or
And
grasshopper?
to maintain the ecosystem.
In terms of what will happen if like its number deviates?
Unbalance हो जाएगा ecosystem.
क्यों unbalance होगा? That's what the question. Why there will be unbalance? Question is why? Because you know that only 10% of energy can be transmitted to next trophic level. अभी only said that ma'am फिर tiger को बहुत सारे goats खाने पड़ेंगे, isn't it? So if number of producers are less, then how that ecosystem will be able to supply energy to the next trophic level, beta? Understood? That's why it is always pyramid shape and number of producers are more. And if number of more, obviously the biomass will be more. And if you know, talk about the Lindman's 10% law, then obviously in each trophic level, the energy should be less. That's why the pyramids are like this. Okay. And that's why it is described in fact by pyramid. So it is representation of food chain. It can be biomass, energy and number, I told you. So you can see in a grassland ecosystem, primary producers number are more and it's more than primary consumer followed by secondary and tertiary consumer. In pyramid of biomass, this is like the structure. If you see that there is suddenly a very deep decrease in case of tertiary consumer, you can see 809, uske baad direct 37, which is very less. Then there is 11, then there is 1.5. In case of inverted pyramid of biomass, it start with the primary consumer and then primary producer. I told you that many a times phytoplanktons are supported by standing crop of zooplankton. In such case, we can see the inverted pyramid where consumer is having more number than the primary producer. Okay. So primary producer convert only 1% of the energy in sunlight available to them in the form of net primary productivity. And thus the it's very critical for next trophic level to have higher number. Okay, so most of the cases ecosystem is upright, that means tip is towards the final consumer and lower the broader part is always occupied by the producer. But there are inverted ecosystem pyramids. We will talk about them. First of all, it's about the insects who are feeding on a big tree. So in this case, there will be starting of the ecosystem with parasites, that is the microbes. Their number is n. Now these microbes are eaten by other parasites like small insects. They are taken by the herbivores, and herbivores are actually helping in the seed dispersal of a big tree. So if it is a tree, it can accommodate all of them, and that's why producers are having the tip of the pyramid. Similarly, here in this aquatic ecosystem, carnivores are starting the ecosystem and their numbers are, or their biomass is big. And here the producers, which are plankton, their biomass is not that high. Okay. So there are limitations of describing energy flow in terms of ecosystem. This will include the first important thing, that if single species is belonging to two or more trophic level, for example, we just discussed about the food web, where same eagle was occupying trophic level 3 or 4. So in such cases, pyramid is failing to explain their position in ecosystem. Apart from that, it's like talking about a simple food chain which is never ever existing in nature. In nature, the thing that is existing is food web, not food chain. The most important thing is saprophytes, that is the decomposers are not mentioned in this structure to make it pyramid, because after the final consumer there will be decomposer which number of which is very high. So then the shape will not be of pyramid. That's why pyramids tactfully avoiding them, so which is a limitation. So now we will talk about the final and most important topic. Before that, I will wish to get back to the video. Once again, give me one moment to share the screen.
Levels in an ecosystem, also known as the ecological pyramid. The ecological pyramid is a graphic representation of an ecological parameter such as number of individuals, amount of biomass, or amount of energy present at different trophic levels in an ecosystem. Trophic levels represent the position of organisms in the food chain. The base of an ecological pyramid represents the first trophic level, or producers. The next trophic level comprises primary consumers, followed by secondary consumers, and finally tertiary consumers at the top. Each of these trophic levels represents a functional level and not a single species as such. Also, all the organisms at a particular trophic level must be considered for any calculation on number, biomass, or energy. For example, we need to consider all the organisms in trophic level 2, namely the grasshopper, mouse, and squirrel, for any calculations on number, biomass, or energy. This is because our generalizations will be invalid if we consider only a few organisms at any trophic level. However, it is also possible that a given organism simultaneously occupies more than one trophic level in the same ecosystem. For example, when a pigeon consumes grains and fruits, it is a primary consumer. Conversely, when the same pigeon consumes worms and insects, it becomes a secondary consumer. Based on the types of parameters used, ecological pyramids are of three types: pyramid of numbers, pyramid of biomass, and pyramid of energy. A pyramid of numbers is a graphic representation of the number of individuals per unit area present at various trophic levels in an ecosystem, and its shape varies from one ecosystem to another. example, in grassland or pond ecosystems, there are a large number of autotrophs or producers per unit area. However, the number of herbivores that depend on these producers is few, and the number of carnivores that depend on the herbivores is still fewer. Therefore, in these two cases, the pyramid of numbers is an upright one, that is, converging towards the tip. Now, in a parasitic food chain like the one shown in the image, a single large tree is supplying food to a large number of herbivorous birds. These herbivorous birds, in turn, are food for a still larger population of ectoparasites, on which a large number of hyperparasites depend. Therefore, in this case, the pyramid of numbers is inverted. Now, consider a third case, where a single large tree provides food to a large number of herbivorous birds. These birds, in turn, are a source of food for carnivorous birds like eagles and kites, which are fewer in number, and hence the pyramid is spindle-shaped, that is, broader in the center and narrow above and below. Now, let's learn about the pyramid of biomass, which is a graphic representation of biomass present per unit area in each trophic level in an ecosystem. In a terrestrial ecosystem, producers have maximum biomass, which decreases progressively from lower to higher trophic levels. Therefore, the pyramid of biomass in a terrestrial ecosystem is always an upright one. On the other hand, the pyramid of biomass in an aquatic ecosystem is either inverted or spindle-shaped. For example, in the food chain shown in the image, the biomass of carnivorous fish is greater than herbivorous fish, and the biomass of the herbivorous fish is much greater than the producers or phytoplankton, leading to an inverted pyramid. However, in aquatic ecosystems like the ones found in the North Pacific Ocean, the pyramid of biomass is spindle-shaped, as the biomass of zooplankton exceeds that of the producers or phytoplankton, while the biomass of primary and secondary carnivores such as herring and sea lion gradually decreases as they are fewer in number compared to the zooplankton. Finally, a pyramid of energy is a graphic representation of the amount of energy trapped per unit time and unit area at different trophic levels of an ecosystem. Each bar in a pyramid of energy represents the energy present at each trophic level at a given time or annually per unit area. Energy is always higher at lower trophic levels, that is, the producer, and flows to higher levels. Moreover, some energy is used for the metabolic activities of organisms, and some energy is dissipated as heat in the process. That is why a pyramid of energy is always upright and never inverted. An ecosystem ecological pyramid also has certain limitations. For instance, it always considers a simple food chain which doesn't exist in nature. Moreover, it doesn't consider a food web and does not take into account species that exist simultaneously at 2 or more trophic levels. Another limitation of an ecological pyramid is that it never takes into account decomposers or saprophytes, though they play a significant role in an ecosystem. In general, an ecological pyramid shows the feeding relationship between groups of organisms and also depicts the amount of biomass or energy present at various trophic levels in an ecosystem. These trees are part of a huge forest. However, the area covered by these trees was once a pond a few hundred years ago. Over a period of time, the population of the different aquatic plant and animal species in the pond was replaced by terrestrial plant and animal species.
So this is, we are talking about the next very interesting part, that is known as ecological succession. That is the last and final part of this chapter, and it's a very small part, but very interesting one. Let me talk about it. Give me some time to swap the screen share. So what is succession? When we studied evolution, we learned that atmosphere or the conditions are never ever constant. Things change around us every now and then. So ecological succession is the best example of these changes. So it's a very slow and gradual change. Doesn't occur within overnight or in a month or in a year. It takes years, and it's a predictable change in species composition of an area. So if I'm talking about succession of this area, it started with, first there was only exposed rock. No life was possible on them. So lichens and mosses inhabited them. Then there was formation of weeds. Then there were perennial grasses, then shrub, then trees, which are mainly coniferous and pine tree, and then finally there were broadleaf forest, because coniferous are generally having needle-shaped leaf. So in this succession, the one which is finally stable and exists in that specific area for long time is called as Climax max community. Okay, so some species like get advantage and increase in their number, and some of them are not anymore thinking that it's a area for living there, and then they disappear. So in this diagram, I wish to elaborate the first organism which is found in this area. There were only exposed rock. So first organisms which was observed in this area were known, the lichens and mosses. They are known as the pioneer species. The different stages of succession is known as sterile stages, and the one which is final is known as climax community. Now, the succession can be of two types. Actually, it can be primary succession or secondary succession. I wish to also highlight that evolution and succession goes hand in hand. Many a times it is observed that succession of organism in an area is finally leading into evolution and creation of a new species. So what are these two types of succession? Primary succession is occurring in an area where no living organism ever existed, like newly cooled lava, bare rock, newly created pond or reservoir. So you can understand day by day the chances of primary succession is decreasing, because we are almost invading to each and every corner of earth, but still there are some areas where life is not found. So if succession is occurring from zero, we call that type of succession as primary succession. But if succession is occurring from an area where there was a organism, then there was forest fire, and these organisms were burned, and from that area, like there was once upon a time a farmhouse, there was some mishap, so all organisms of that area, plants of that area were destroyed, and now new types of plants are coming out. So such kind of succession where organism was previously there but now they are not there, and again from a new source there is new organisms formed, that is called secondary succession. And obviously secondary succession is faster, because in primary succession the pioneer community needs a lot of time to make that area able to survive. In secondary succession, as in that area previously organisms were found, that area is more friendly for the survival of organisms. So succession actually changes the vegetation effect. For example, if there is succession, the animal type or their food habit or the type of decomposers change, and many a time the invasion of human can affect the succession. Like it can, for example, new conditions are created by human being. They can encourage some species. For example, if a new change is made in an ecosystem, uh, a species which was not getting, best example I can talk about Biston betamularia peppered moth, how human invasion give priority to the peppered moth, not the white one. So it was helpful in elimination of white moth and converting the moth species peppered one as the beneficial one. So based on nature of habitat, if plant succession is occurring in water, it is hydrat, if land, it is xeric. So you can see in water or wetter places, it is from hydric to mesic condition. Mesic condition is the condition which is more favorable. And in xeric, it is from dry area to the normal one. That's why from xeric to mesic condition. So in both type of succession, the ultimate aim is mesic condition. Okay. So you can see here primary succession on rock. Lichens are pioneer one, and then small plants like bryophytes, because lichens are responsible for secreting certain kind of chemicals which can cause withering of rock and convert them into soil. And on that type of soil, the next type of plants, that is bryophytes, which require very small amount of soil, can survive. And then slowly and steadily there was further withering of the rocky area, and there was bigger plants, and finally there was development of a forest. Here we are taking example of succession in plant in water. Phytoplanktons from which submerged plant stage and then submerged to free floating, then reed swamp stage where these plants are having their bottom fixed at the soil but their upper part is out, and then marshmallow stage, and finally the you can see the deep condition of this swamp is slowly and steadily getting shallow, and finally there will be formation of a forest. So this is how from water body there is creation of a mesophytic condition. So with this, I am stopping here. I will just share the video of like succession, and we will be saying bye for today, and then we will talk about geochemical cycles in our next lecture.
This gradual and fairly predictable change in the composition of different species in a given area is known as ecological succession. During ecological succession, the population of certain species increases, while that of many others may decline or even disappear. In fact, present-day communities across the world are the result of ecological succession that took place over several million years. It is assumed that succession and evolution are parallel processes in operation since time immemorial. All communities undergo constant changes in their composition and structure in response to changes in environmental conditions. These changes take place in a sequential and orderly manner, leading to a climax community which is in near equilibrium with the environment. For example, in the ecological succession from a pond to a forest, the climax community is the forest. Also, in the process of ecological succession, the sequence of communities that replace one another in a given area is known as a seer or seers. Each transitional community is called a seral community or a seral stage. In each successive seral stage, the diversity of plant and animal species increases along with an increase in the number of species and total biomass. But what causes ecological succession? Primarily, there are two causes for ecological succession: biotic factors and physiographic factors. Biotic factors include interactions between different organisms in a community, leading to changes in composition, structure, and functions in that community. Physiographic factors, on the other hand, include physical factors like floods, erosion, and landslides, and chemical factors like nature of soil and water. Furthermore, ecological succession is of two types: primary and secondary. Primary succession is a type of biotic succession that takes place in areas where no life previously existed. Some such areas include bare rock, new islands exposed out of the sea, sand dunes, and newly created lava or a pond. The process of primary succession takes a very long time. A possible reason being that soil is required for the creation of new biotic communities, and the process of soil formation takes several hundred or thousand years depending on climatic conditions. Conversely, secondary succession is a type of biotic succession that takes place in areas that once had an existing biotic community, which was wiped out due to reasons like earthquakes, landslides, or fire. As secondary succession takes place in areas which once had congenial conditions for the existence of life, along with some existing soil or sediments, the time taken for this type of succession is comparatively less than for primary succession. However, at any time during the process of primary or secondary succession, man-made or natural disturbances can result in a particular seral stage being converted to an earlier stage. Now, let's learn about the process of ecological succession in plants. Based on the nature of the habitat, ecological succession of plants is categorized as hydrarch, mesarch, and xerarch. When succession takes place in regions with plenty of water, such as swamps, ponds, or lakes, it is known as hydrarch. Here, the succession series progresses from hydric or highly wet conditions to mesic or medium water conditions. On the other hand, when succession takes place in regions with moist, well-aerated soil, it is known as mesarch. Finally, succession in regions with minimum moisture, such as rocks and deserts, is known as xerarch. Here, the succession series progresses from xeric or highly dry conditions to mesic conditions. The species that invades a bare area during primary succession is known as the pioneer species, and it varies depending on the area where the succession is taking place. The pioneer species is usually the lichens when primary succession takes place on a rock. Lichens have the ability to secrete acids that dissolve rocks, helping in the processes of weathering and soil formation. The small amount of soil thus formed leads to the growth of plants like bryophytes or moss, which over a period of time get replaced by bigger plants like herbs and shrubs. After several succession stages, big plants get replaced by trees, leading to a stable climax forest. These are images of a terrestrial and an aquatic ecosystem. You can see that in both these ecosystems, the energy flow begins with the sun. In fact, the sun is the only source of energy for all ecosystems on Earth except for the deep-sea hydrothermal ecosystem, whose primary source of energy is the heat produced inside the Earth's crust. Of the sun's incident radiation, less than 50% is photosynthetically active radiation, or PAR, which is the spectral range of solar radiation that can be used by green plants for photosynthesis. However, in reality, plants utilize only about 2 to 10% of PAR, and incredibly, this small amount of energy sustains the whole world. In all ecosystems, the solar energy tapped by plants or producers is converted into chemical energy and is passed on to all other organisms. All organisms which are directly or indirectly dependent on producers for their food are known as consumers. Hence, there is a unidirectional flow of energy from the sun to producers and then to consumers. This flow of energy in the ecosystem can be depicted by a food chain, which also shows the interdependence of organisms. Here we can see that producers are food for herbivores, which in turn are food for primary carnivores. Likewise, primary carnivores are food for secondary carnivores. Thus, the energy of an organism in general does not remain inside it, but either flows to consumers or to decomposers when it dies. Now, in nature, there are two types of food chains: grazing food chain or GFC and detritus food chain or DFC. Most ecosystems in nature follow.
So do you have any doubt in this part? Then only we will look into the video, or we will stop here. Shabi? The
No, ma'am.
difference between grazing and detritus. So that's all then from my side today. We will look into the biogeochemical cycles. That is the last part of this chapter in our next lecture. Okay. So bye to all of you.